Our special guest today is Tim Lebbon. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Crystal. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Tim, and how you got started in the horror genre.
Oh, wow. Right. Long story and short story. So I'll go for the shorter one, which is I've been writing since pretty much I could pick up a pencil. I wrote loads through my teens. My first horror story I wrote when I was in my early 20s. And then I wrote through my 20s short stories, which were published by small press magazines back then. Yeah. Sounding old now, but I'm 54, so that was a little while ago. So lots of magazines, which some of your listeners might remember, called Peeping Tom, Grotesque, Third Alternative. So I wrote for those magazines, and then I wrote a novel which was picked up, I think it was published when I was about 27 or 28 by Tangent Press, who also published people like Rhys Hughes and Derek Fox. And then, it was all horror. Everything I wrote was horror pretty much, or with supernatural undertones. I never really analyzed why that was. And people ask me why you write horror and not something else. And my answer is always a saying my grandmother had, which is, it's the way my mum put my hat on. It's just, just the way my muse takes me, really. So first novel, I was like 27 or 28. And then for a few years after that, things just sort of got better and better every year. And then I think I was about 33 when I went part-time in work to write. And then I was about 36 or 37 years old. I quit work full-time to write, and I've been doing it ever since. And it's pretty much exclusively, in the fantastic genre, by which I mean horror, sci-fi, fantasy, supernatural.
So you sort of like cross between the genres?
Yeah, I do. I try to write just what I want to write. Obviously, a lot of the time, if I'm hired by a publisher to write a horror novel, I've got to make sure it has horror elements. But sometimes I'll write something for myself. Like I often just sit down and write a novella, and it just comes out whatever my muse wants it to be, really. I've written a couple of thrillers. I've written, I think, about over 45 novels published now, and two of those are thrillers. They're straight thrillers. There's no supernatural element. Yeah. But they are really, really dark. They're dark thrillers. So it's just the way I edge, I guess, towards writing. I do jump between genres. I've written fantasy. I've written a little bit of sci-fi, horror, ghost stories. Horrors are all encompassing. It was Doug Winter who said, horror is not a genre, it's an emotion. So you can write horror novels in any genre, really. So when I say I'm a horror writer, it doesn't just mean I write zombie novels or anything like that. I've written very dark thrillers. I've written dark fantasy, which are essentially horror novels set in an alternate world. It's all pretty dark, really. I get it all out on the page. That's what I like to say.
So where'd you get your ideas from?
Oh, God. That's something else I don't try and analyze too much. They just, anywhere and everywhere, I guess, is the answer. I was looking through my novel ideas file on my computer the other day, and I probably got a couple of hundred files there, documents with various titles. And sometimes I'll open them and there'll be a one-liner. There'll be the opening of a novel or a concept, or a quote or a line from a song. Other times I open these files and I find that 8 years ago I wrote a 10-page proposal that I've almost forgotten about.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, these ideas, I find I wait until a novel feels sort of three-dimensional to me, and it sort of has heart and a soul. And that often happens when two or three ideas collide, or if I combine two ideas or three ideas, and it grows into a novel idea. Very rarely, for me, does a novel just slap me in the face and say, And I can remember I wrote a novel called The Silence, which was it's adapted. It's actually on Netflix now as well as a movie. And that I can remember thinking monsters that hunt by sound, and I'll call it The Silence. And that one just presented itself to me really. It's a fairly sort of high concept idea, and it sort of just appeared to me from out of nowhere. Other times I have to work hard to develop ideas. Long way of saying I don't really know where they come from. they just thankfully arrive most of the time.
So how do you develop your characters?
A bit of pre-planning. I'm more of a pantser than a planner, so my novels tend not to be planned in great, huge detail. I'll have a rough concept, and I'll know the story I want to tell, and I'll know about the characters. I know a little bit about the characters who I want to inhabit that story, but they develop and grow usually as I'm writing. So just occasionally quite often I'll do a character like interview for myself before I start writing. So I'll ask them 10 questions on paper and just sort of try and build a character like that. But I honestly find trying to plan a character and develop them in my head and on the page without actually writing a novel doesn't benefit me. So my characters come to life and develop and grow through the actual writing process. So I'll have an idea of who I'm going to be meeting and using when I do a novel outline. I mean, I often sell novels on outline to a publisher, so they have to have, so I'll write an outline and develop it, and sometimes, thankfully, sell it to a publisher, and then often put the outline in the drawer and never look at it again, and then just go and write the novel. Don't tell my publishers that. But yeah, I think they grow through the telling of a story rather than the planning of a story. That's probably the easy way of putting it for me.
Yeah, it's quite a unique way of doing it, having an interview with the characters.
Yeah, I can't remember. I don't do it for every novel or even every character. I can't remember where I read a writer I was reading about used to do that. And honestly, it might have been King. I can't remember. King strikes me more of a pantser than a planner, definitely. But I did read it somewhere, and sometimes it's interesting, but it's another one of those things that I'll do and then put it to one side and probably never look at it again. It's almost a way of like introducing yourself to a character. It's like meeting a stranger in a coffee shop and having a quick chat, and then you have an idea of that person in your head. But to get to know them really, to get to know them better, you need to spend 6 months with them, which is what you do with characters in a novel rather than half an hour in a coffee shop.
Yeah. So do you explore a particular theme or a message? Just like, does it sort of like throughout your books, do you have like a particular theme or message that suddenly appears in your book?
You mean a common theme through several books, or I guess when I became a father 25 years ago, that changed my writing overnight to writing about what you know is really great advice. And I used to not like that advice, but then I realized that it doesn't mean I can't write about creatures that don't exist, or zombies or vampires if I choose to.
Yeah.
But it means the core of the story, writing about what you know, is for me my greatest fear is something happening to my family. So pretty much a lot of what I write about now is about threats to family and family dynamics. I wouldn't say that's a theme through the books. I mean, it's putting your characters in peril is, I think, something that you need to do as a writer. You establish characters and then throw shit at them and put them through hell. I think that's something Stephen King said. You get to know your characters and love them, and then you put them through the worst time of their lives. So I guess family, strength of family bond and relationships is a bit of a theme. there's no real, like I say, I jump between worlds and between genre, between commonly accepted genres. I try not to think genre too much while I'm writing because I don't want to be constricted. But also another theme, certainly lately in my writing, is the environment. I'm a massive, I live in the country. I love nature. I've always loved nature since I was a kid. I was in the Young Ornithologists Club when I was 9 or 10, Wasn't cool to be a bird watcher, but I enjoyed it when I was young, and I still love nature now. I'm out in nature every single day, running or cycling or walking or swimming in the summer. I do have friends that swim in the winter. They break ice to get in lakes. I'm not quite that extreme. But so nature and our relationship with the natural world, I guess, is an ongoing theme. Not in everything I write, but I always come back to it. My first traditionally sort of published novel was called The Nature of Balance, with a publisher in New York called Leisure. And that was unashamedly nature takes revenge for man's misuse of it novel. So yeah, I guess that is the theme. Humans' relationship with the natural world.
Yeah. So have you based any of your stories off personal experiences or characters?
Oh yeah, I mean all the time. I think virtually everything any writer writes has an element of autobiography, whether you recognize it or not, or whether you intend it or not. And that a bit of that goes back to writing what you know. So, and like I said, writing what you know doesn't necessarily mean that you can't write about zombies because you've never met one, but it does mean you can incorporate what scares you into that writing, like zombies threatening your family, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's always personal experience that goes into my writing. And sometimes I know it and sometimes I don't. And I don't mind that. I think writing's magic. It's the nearest thing to magic that we have, storytelling. We've got 26, in the English language, we've got 26 letters. And we can put them together into various forms and combinations and come up with amazing make-believe stories that stick with the reader. Some of them stick with the reader forever and change lives. And I think writing's magic. And the part of the magic for me is feeding myself into my stories without really realizing it. And I wrote a novella recently called The Last Day and the First, which is quite a gentle sort of examination of growing old and dying. Unlike a lot of my stuff, it is an apocalyptic story, but I feel it's very hopeful and positive, and that's not always the case with my stuff. But I didn't realize, and this sounds crazy, but I wrote this 2000, sort of autumn 2001, and January 2001, my dad passed away, and I honestly didn't realize when I was writing it. It's a novella about my dad passing away, and I only realized that after I'd finished it, sent it to my agent, got his, he loved it, got his reaction. My agent's, quite a bit older than me, and he said it really struck home with me, and I suddenly thought, of course it did. It's about Dad, and I love that side of writing. The fact that you put a bit of yourself. If you're doing good writing, I mean, I always try and make what I'm working on better than what I've done before. It doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
If you're writing as to your best endeavors, you'll be putting a lot of yourself into your work, whether you sort of recognize it or not, I think.
Fantastic. Okay, so what do you find hard writing in horror?
Do you mean, is there stuff I wouldn't write about or avoid, or
things that you find difficult writing?
Well, I suppose kids in peril, because my kids are older now. I still call them kids. My daughter's 25 and my son is 20, but they're still my kids.
Yeah.
So I think I find writing about family in peril quite hard. But that's why I think it's effective when I do write about it. Because if a writer finds something hard or difficult to write, that comes through for the reader as well. And if you're trying to get a certain effect like fear or dread, in horror, that's sometimes what we try and go for, then it makes it more effective. I'm I'm a nature lover, I'm a dog lover. It was made clear to me a few years ago that 3 novels in a row I killed dogs. And that was, I wrote a scene in The Silence, which is probably a bit of a spoiler, but, it's been out for 8 years now, where a family had to kill a dog, their pet dog, to prevent it from giving them away to these creatures that were hunting them. And I really horrible scene to write, which is strange because, I killed so many people in my books, but kill a dog and it's really painful. But it's strange how that resonates with readers as well. I had more shit about that scene than virtually anything else I've written. I've wiped out billions of people in my books. I've destroyed the world countless times. But you kill a dog and you're going to upset some people. Even in reviews, a lot of people say, I didn't read any further, 1 star. And it's like, well, I sort of understand that. Cruelty to animals in books and dogs is they're innocent. They don't deserve anything. But then cruelty to a lot of people is nasty because they're innocent and they don't deserve it. It's a strange thing. So I find that quite tough. I haven't killed so many dogs in my books lately.
Yeah, you can't kill the dog.
No, exactly. And if you do, you got to accept the repercussions, which is people dumping your book halfway through. But it is really interesting when they made the movie of that book. They filmed the scene as I wrote it, and then when a distributor came on board to show the film around, they said you can't show this. You can't. There's mutilated bodies in the film. It's not like a 15 or 8 or R-rated horror. I think it was like a PG-13 sort of level. But so many people die in the book in horrible ways. But then you can't, or the distributors know you can't kill the dog like that, because in the book the father chokes the dog to stop it barking and giving them away with his arm around it. And they actually filmed the scene with Stanley Tucci, who was the main star of the film. He was really passionate about doing that scene properly because he acted his ass out on it.
Yeah.
And then they had to reshoot it so that they just let the dog out of the car. So the implication is it gets killed. So you can wipe out as many people as you want, but be nice to the canines.
Yeah, that's very true in the horror world, isn't it? You can do whatever you want to people, but as soon as you touch a dog, that's it. Yeah,
I've learned that. But it's also writing about what upsets you. I think if you're writing about something that affects you or upsets you, it comes through in the writing, and it certainly did in that scene, I think.
Yeah. So what's been the most difficult scene that you've ever write?
Maybe that one, or I wrote, my mum passed away like 17 or 18 years ago now, and I wrote a novella about her illness and death, and that was really tough. That was called The Reach of Children. That was a really tough thing to write from beginning to end, really. But it was my way of sort of not dealing with it. So you never deal with it, but just my way. I'm naturally a storyteller and a writer, so it's the way I work through things sometimes. So that was a tough one to write, and I've never gone back and read it in its entirety. It was for a publisher that went bust before the damn book was published. So there's only about 200 copies of it out there. Yeah. Although it's in collections, and I published it as an ebook myself. So yeah, that was hard.
So have you had any memorable feedback off readers that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of I have nice feedback quite often. I like the fact that usually if you get personal feedback from a reader, it's good. Rarely does a reader email me and say I read your book and I hated it. That doesn't happen very often, thankfully. So yeah, I I used to get written fan mail, which was cool. Letters. Remember them?
Yeah.
I think I did have one a few years ago. Another reader took time to actually handwrite a letter to me, which was lovely. But yeah, I get some nice, and it's a good. Writers need it. However they project themselves on the dreaded social media or whatever. Pretty much every writer I know is fairly sort of delicate when it comes to their work. And I've been writing a long time. I still get imposter syndrome and lack of confidence about my work. There's no novel I've ever written that I've loved from beginning to end. There's always a moment, usually about halfway through, where I'm just thinking, this is not working. It's going to be terrible. It's the worst thing I've ever written. And also, I'm still, even after 45 novels and God knows how many short stories and novellas, I'm still not very good at being objective about my work. And that's because you put so much of yourself into your writing, I think.
Yeah.
And also, you're so close to it for so long. I mean, when I deliver a novel to a publisher, I've probably read it 30 times. So it's difficult to be objective. So getting feedback from people who've loved it is a huge. I still love getting great response from readers. It's still a huge boost. And then anytime I get a fan mail, email, or whatever, I hate the word fan mail, but whenever I get a message online or an email from somebody saying how much they've liked my work, it really makes my day. And it's important to tell. And now more than ever, writers are more accessible than they were, before social media and email. It was finding somebody's address somehow and writing. But, it's always good to tell a writer that you love their book. It does more good than you probably think a lot of the time.
Yeah. Writers are their own worst critic, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Almost certainly, most of the time, definitely. Like I said, I'm very bad at being. I sent a new novel to my agent recently, and I was sort of thinking, oh, it's quite good, but I honestly couldn't tell, and I didn't really know. It's when the book's finally released and out there in the world that you get the proper, because I write for myself, but also I do it for a living, so I write for my readers as well. So getting reader responses is the most important judgment on a book, I think.
Yeah. So what exciting projects have you got coming up?
I've got a new novel out in February called Among the Living, which is, so I've written 2 novels recently, one called Eden, which was out April 2020, which is the worst time in the whole universe to release a book, unfortunately, because that was just when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
and then 2021, 22, I had a novel called The Last Storm, and they were both eco thrillers, sort of environmental climate change horror stroke thrillers. This new novel, Among the Living, is more. It's got a link to the environmental climate crisis, but it's much more of a contained novel, and it's a real horror novel. It's the most horror novel I've written in years. And I'm really excited about seeing that out in the world. It's been called desperation horror, which I really like that term. It's fast paced, it's brutal, and with big odds. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one out. That's from Titan in February in the UK and the US.
Yeah.
And hopefully later next year, another short novel I've written with my good friend Peter Crowther from PS Publishing. This quite possibly is the longest collaboration in history. I think we took 21 years to write this book, would you believe? And that's, I've been friends with Pete for obviously longer than that. And we started writing this book together, and we were both just so crap at getting our bit done and turning it around. And we're so busy. Sometimes years went by without us writing a couple of chapters. But yeah, we finally finished it, and we're really chuffed with it. And I think Pete's going to publish that through one of his PS Publishing imprints. I love working with PS Publishing. I do, a book every year or two with them. My collection, All Nightmare Long, last year was out through them, and that's just won a World Fantasy Award, which is really exciting.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, they do great books. They're fantastic to work with. Books look beautiful. What else have I got going on? That's about it. All I can announce for now, I think. There's, I've always got screen stuff ticking over. I've written a TV pilot for my novel Eden, and I've written a spec script based on one of my thrillers, and they're both with my manager in LA at the moment. He's showing them around again now the strikes are over, which is good news.
Yeah, definitely. So have you ever felt any sort of like remorse from what you put your readers through?
No, not really. I mean, it's I quite like if someone mails me or whatever and says, "Oh God, that scene really upset me." I sort of, well, that means it worked. So, no, it's writing's it's entertainment. It is magic, like I said before. If you tell a story that really affects a reader, then the magic's worked. But I'm not really putting them through anything. If they're reading something and it upsets them, they stop reading. I don't set out to upset people in my writing. I know I've met a couple of horror writers that say, "Oh yeah, I really want to break boundaries and disgust and upset readers." I don't really actively set out to try and do that. I want to tell a good story and stir emotions in readers, but I don't sort of feel sorry for upsetting them if that is something I'm trying to do in a certain scene.
Yeah. So how do you feel when something gets filmed and it's aired on the TV?
Well, yeah, it's amazing. I've had a couple of movies made now, which I've been very lucky. I know a lot of writers. I know loads of horror writers, and I'm one of the luckier ones when it comes to screen adaptations. I've had loads. You tend to have stuff optioned fairly regularly. I've had stuff up. I've probably had 20 options, I guess. And obviously, when it happens, the producers are, "Oh yeah, this is definitely going to be made, no doubt about it," and then it fades away. But I've been lucky with Pay the Ghost with Nicolas Cage. That was back in 2014, maybe that was out, 2013, even before then. I've got the poster here. Hang on. I can't see a date on it. Yeah, so, and then The Silence with Stanley Tucci and Kiernan Shipka, which was amazing as well. I've been really pleased with both of them. I wasn't involved in Pay the Ghost at all. They bought the rights to my story and adapted it and filmed it. But The Silence, I made friends with the director and the producers, and they got me on set, and I was a bloody corpse in the film as well, which was exciting. But that was an amazing experience. And I'm really pleased with both films. I know some writers have had films done and they sort of disown, but I'm pleased with how they both turned out. So I've been very lucky. Yeah. And I'm hoping there'll be more. Like I said, I'm always nagging my manager in LA. Any news? He's reading Among the Living, my new novel at the moment. I think it would make a really great, smaller budget, propulsive, brutal horror novel. I think a movie. I think it could be really good. So we'll see what happens there.
Fantastic. I loved Pay the Ghost. That was really, I love that film. That's fantastic. That's a fantastic film, that is.
Yeah, I was really pleased with it. I put on a screening for family and friends in the local theatre in Newport, and I purposely didn't watch it until that evening, which was, so I stood up in front of everyone, did a little talk, and said, "No, I haven't watched this yet. If it's shit, it's nothing to do with me. But if it's good, obviously, it was my story."
Yeah.
And it turned out okay. And it was brilliant watching it with a lot of friends and family who didn't watch horror films, because it is one of those films where every 7 or 8 minutes there's a jump scare. Somebody's head turns around on their neck, or a hand smashes against a window frame, that sort of thing, So lots of people were screaming and jumping, and it was a great experience.
So what sort of advice would you give someone who wanted to break out into the horror genre?
Read a lot and write a lot. And I mean, that sounds glib, but sitting down and writing is the only way you're going to get any writing done. So I write. I don't write every day. I tend not to work at weekends, and I guess that's a little bit of a hangover, even though I've been doing it full time for 18 years now. That's just a hangover for me working 9 to 5 for a few years. Just read a lot. Read outside the genre. Don't just read horror novels. Read what interests you. Write what interests you. And try and write for yourself. So write stuff that you feel passionate and excited about. And also take rejection on the chin and try and learn from it, as opposed to getting upset by it. I still get rejections a lot of the time now. I'll send a novel. My agent will send a novel out and the rejections start coming in. And you sort of start to realize sometimes, there's stock rejections like, sorry, we're developing something similar at the moment. And they've all, people have always got a reason to reject something. And sometimes it might not be exactly what they're really thinking. So, but a good rejection, like I learned this back in my 20s when I was writing short stories. A good rejection can teach you more than an acceptance, because if someone takes time to tell you why they're rejecting something, it can help you sort of analyze what you've written and maybe what you've done wrong.
Yeah.
So read a lot, write a lot, and accept that there's going to be rejections and take them on the chin and learn from them. That's what I'd say.
I think that's what puts most people off, isn't it? Is the rejections. Once they get one rejection, that's it.
Oh, I used to get hundreds, and I've got files. I think I've still got them in the attic full of rejection letters. I could paper a room. And it's there was a magazine called The Third Alternative that changed into Black Static, which is only just finished now. And that from it's like 30 years, that magazine's been going. An amazing magazine by Andy Cox, great editor. I was struggling to get into that magazine for years, and I think I wrote 21 stories, and he took the 22nd. And it made me write better. Andy's rejections and his comments on my stories made me more determined and made me write better. So, rejections is literally part of the business. There's probably a few writers that don't get rejections, but not many, I don't think. I still get, I tend to, if I'm commissioned to write a short story, it's not often it's rejected anymore, but that's, that's because if you're commissioned to write something by an editor, usually they do so because they like your writing and they know you'll write something that they like. But yeah, I do still get rejected, and it's part of the business.
Where do you see the horror genre going?
Oh, bigger and better, I hope. I think horror movies have never died away. Horror novels, horror prose, horror publishing is sort of cyclical. It's up and down. I think it's in a great place at the moment. There's loads of great new writers coming along, and the old guard is still putting great stuff out as well. I'm early 50s, but I'm still as excited and passionate about and fired up about writing new stuff as I ever was, really. And so I want to be writing into my 60s, 70s, 80s if I can. Yeah. That's my intention. I've no sort of retirement aims as such. Maybe slow down, at some point. And but I think the genre is in a good place. I think it's been, I mentioned the small press magazines I used to write for in my 20s. They were literally hand printed at home and stapled and sent in the mail.
Yeah.
The similar versions of that now are the great indie presses you see around publishing great stuff now. So I think horror is in a good state.
Fantastic.
Long may it continue.
Yeah, with horror at the moment, there's that many subgenres coming out of horror. There seems to be a new one every other week at the minute.
Yeah. It's just different names for different names for the same stuff a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You know, I don't mind. You know, like I say, I just call myself a horror writer. I'm not a gentle, quiet horror writer or a splatterpunk writer or extreme horror writer or supernatural, although I've written all that sort of stuff. I don't try and, I wouldn't want to just narrow down to one particular sort of perceived genre of horror, because I like to keep, I just love storytelling in any form. You know, I've written novels, novellas, short stories. I worked on a computer game. I've written stuff for Audible. I've written screenplays. It's all comics. It's all storytelling, and I just love telling stories. And to keep it fresh, you know, for me, I just like to tell a variety of stories in different ways. So, yeah, I think genres are there more for publishers than they are for writers.
Yeah.
Publishers want and need to know. You know, I've seen my books mainly on horror shelves in bookshops, but sometimes in A to Z fiction, or sometimes in fantasy, and I'm fine with all that. You know, publishers just need to know what shelf to put your book on a lot of the time, and booksellers.
Yeah. So where can we find your books, Tim?
Well, my website's timlebbon.net, and most of my books are available on all the usual online sellers. And if you're lucky, you'll find them in bookshops. Waterstones generally have my latest. If they don't, you can order stuff through bookshops. That's always a good thing to do, because it lets them know that there's still a demand. So yeah, and in the US, you know, I'm published UK and US by Titan at the moment. Or I have been for years, actually. I think I've done like 15 novels for Titan now, including you know, a fair bit of tie-in stuff like Alien and Predator and Firefly. So yeah, bookshops UK and US and all your usual online book sources.
Fantastic. Well, it's been fantastic. It's been lovely having you on the show, Tim. So thank you very much.
I've enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks very much.
Very welcome.